Chapter 3 At the Gates of Tashbaan. "My name," said the girl at once, "is Aravis Tarkina, and I am the only daughter of Kidrash Tarkhan, the son of Rishti Tarkhan, and the son of Kidrash Tarkhan, the son of Ilsombre Tizrock, the son of Ardib Tizrock, who was descended in a right line from the god Tash. My father is the lord of the province of Calabar, and is one who has the right of standing on his feet in his shoes before the Tizrock himself, may he live forever. My mother, on whom be the peace of the gods, is dead, and my father has married another wife. One of my brothers has fallen in battle against the rebels in the far west, and the other is a child. Now it came to pass that my father's wife, my stepmother, hated me, and the sun appeared dark in her eyes as long as I lived in my father's house. And so she persuaded my father to promise me in marriage to Ahosta Tarkhan. Now this Ahosta is of a base birth, though in those latter years he has won the favor of the Tizrock, may he live forever, by flattery and evil counsels, and is now made a Tarkhan, and the lord of many cities, and is likely to be chosen as the Grand Vizier when the present Grand Vizier dies. Moreover, he is at least 60 years old, and has a hump on his back, and his face resembles that of an ape. Nevertheless, my father, because of the wealth and power of Ahosta, and being persuaded by his wife, sent messengers offering me in marriage, and this offer was favorably accepted, and Ahosta sent word that he would marry me this very year at the time of high summer. When this news was brought to me, the sun appeared dark in my eyes, and I laid myself on my bed and wept for a day. But on the second day I rose up, washed my face, and caused my mare Hwin to be saddled, and took with me a sharp dagger, which my brother had carried in the western wars, and rode out alone. And when my father's house was out of sight, I came to a green open place in a certain wood where there were no dwellings of men. I dismounted from Hwin my mare, and took out the dagger. I parted my clothes where I thought the readiest way lay to my heart, and I prayed to all the gods that as soon as I was dead, I might find myself with my brother. After that I shut my eyes and my teeth, and prepared to drive the dagger into my heart. But before I had done so, this mare spoke to me with the voice of one of the daughters of men, and said, "O my mistress, do not by any means destroy yourself, for if you live, you may yet have good fortunes, but all the dead are dead alike." "I didn't say it half so well as that," muttered the mare. "Hush, ma'am, hush," said Bree, who was thoroughly enjoying the story. "She's telling it in the grand Calermean manner, and no story in a Tizrock's court could have done it better. Pray, go on, Tarkina." "When I heard the language of men uttered by my mare," continued Aravis, "I said to myself, the fear of death had disordered my reason and subjected me to delusions. And I became full of shame, for none of my lineage ought to fear death more than the biting of a gnat. Therefore I addressed myself a second time to the stabbing. But Hwin came near to me, and put her head in between me and the dagger, and discoursed me in most excellent reasons, and rebuked me as a mother rebukes her daughter. And now my wonder was so great that I forgot about killing myself and Ahosta, and said, 'O my mare, how have you learned to speak like one of the daughters of men?' And Hwin told me what is known to all this company, that in Narnia there are beasts that talk, and how she herself was stolen from thence when she was a little foal. She told me also the woods and waters of Narnia, and the castles and the great ships, till I said, 'In the name of Tash, and Azeroth, and Zardina, Lady of the Night, I have a great wish to be in that country of Narnia.' 'O my mistress,' answered the mare, 'if you were in Narnia you would be happy, for in that land no maiden is forced to marry against her will.' And when we had talked together for a great time, hope returned to me, and I rejoiced that I had not killed myself. Moreover, it was agreed between Hwin and me that we should steal ourselves away, and we planned it in this fashion. We returned to my father's house, and I put on my gayest clothes, and sang and danced before my father, and pretended to be delighted with the marriage which he had prepared for me. And I said to him, O my father, and O the delight of my eyes, give me your license and permission to go with one of my maidens alone for 3 days into the woods, to do the secret sacrifices to Zardina, Lady of the Night, and of the Maiden, as it is proper and customary for damsels when they must bid farewell to the service of Zardina, and prepare themselves for marriage. And he answered, O my daughter, and O the delight of my eyes, so it shall be. But when I came from the presence of my father, I went immediately to the oldest of his slaves, his secretary, who had dandled me on his knees when I was a baby, and loved me more than air and the light. And I swore him to be secret, and begged him to write certain letters for me. And he wept, and implored me to change my resolution, but in the end he said, To hear is to obey. And he did all my will, and I sealed the letter, and hid it in my bosom. But what was in the letter? Asked Shasta. Be quiet, youngster, said Bree. You're spoiling the story. She'll tell us all about the letter in the right place. Go on, Tarkina. Then I called the maid who was to go with me into the woods to perform the rites of Zardina, and I told her to wake me very early in the morning. And I became very merry with her, and gave her wine to drink, but I had mixed such things in her cup, that I knew she must sleep for a night and a day. As soon as the household of my father had committed themselves to sleep, I arose, and put on an armor of my brother's, which I had always kept in my chamber in his memory. I put on my girdle all the money I had, and certain choice jewels, and provided myself also with food. Saddled the mare with my own hands, and rode away in the second watch of the night. I directed my course, not to the woods where my father supposed I would go, but north and east to Tashbaan. For 3 days and more I knew that my father would not seek me, being deceived by the words I had said to him. And on the 4th day we arrived in the city of Azim Balda. Now Azim Balda stands at the meeting of many roads, and from the posts of the Tizrak, may he live forever, ride on swift horses to every part of the empire. And it is one of those rights and privileges of the greater Tarkans to send messages by them. I therefore went to the chief of the messengers in the house of the imperial post in Azim Balda and said, O dispatcher of messengers, here is a letter from my uncle Ahosta Tarkan to Kidrash Tarkan, lord of Kalavar. Take now these 5 crescents and cause it to be sent to him. And the chief of the messengers said, To hear is to obey. This letter was feigned to be written by Ahosta, and this was the signification of the writing. Ahosta Tarkan to Kidrash Tarkan, salutation and peace. In the name of Tash, the irresistible, the inexorable. Be it known to you that I made my journey toward your house to perform the contract of marriage between me and your daughter Aravis Tarkina. It pleased fortune and the gods that I fell in with her in the forest when she had ended the rites and sacrifices of Zardina according to the custom of the maidens. And when I learned who she was, being delighted with her beauty and discretion, I became inflamed with love, and it appeared to me the sun would be dark to me if I did not marry her at once. Accordingly I prepared the necessary sacrifices and married your daughter the same hour I met her, and have returned with her to my own house. And we both pray and charge you to come hither as speedily as you may, that we might be delighted with your face and speech, and also that you may bring with you the dowry of my wife, which, by reason of my great charges and expenses, I require without delay. And because thou and I are brothers, I assure myself that you will not be angered by the haste of my marriage, which is wholly occasioned by the great love I bear for your daughter. And I commit you to the care of all the gods. As soon as I had done this, I rode on in all haste from Azim Balda, fearing no pursuit, and expecting that my father, having received such a letter, would send messengers to Ahosta, or to go to him himself, and before the matter was discovered, I should be beyond Tashbaan. And that is the pith of my story until this very night, when I was chased by lions and met you in the swimming of the salt water. And what happened to the girl? The one you drugged? Asked Shasta. Doubtless she was beaten for sleeping late, said Aravis coolly. But she was a tool and a spy of my stepmother's. I am very glad they should beat her." "I say, that was hardly fair," said Shasta. "I did not do any of these things for the sake of pleasing you," said Aravis. "And there's another thing I don't understand about that story," said Shasta. "You're not grown up. I don't believe you're any older than I am. I don't believe you're as old. How could you be getting married at your age?" Aravis said nothing, but Bree said at once, "Shasta, don't display your ignorance. They're always married at that age in the great Tarkhan families." And Shasta turned very red, though it was hardly light enough for the others to see this. Felt snubbed. Aravis asked Bree for his story, and Bree told it, and Shasta thought he put in a great deal more than he needed to about all the falls and bad writing. Bree obviously thought it was very funny, but Aravis did not laugh. When Bree had finished, they all went to sleep. The next day, all four of them, 2 horses and 2 humans, continued their journey together. Shasta thought it would have been much pleasanter when he and Bree were on their own. For now it was Bree and Aravis who did nearly all the talking. Bree had lived a long time in Calerman and had always been among the Tarkhans and the Tarkhans' horses, and so, of course, he knew a great many of the same people and places that Aravis knew. She would always be saying things like, "But if you were in the fight of Zulindra, you would have seen my cousin Alamash." And Bree would answer, "Oh yes, Alamash. He was only captain of the church, I don't quite hold with chariots or the sort of horses who draw chariots. They're not real cavalry, but he is a worthy nobleman. He filled my nose bag with sugar after the taking of Tebeth." Or else Bree would say, "I was down the lake of Mesril that summer," and Aravis would say, "Oh, Mesril. I had a friend there. La Serene Tarkina. What a delightful place it is. Those gardens and the valley of 1,000 perfumes." Bree was not in the least trying to leave Shasta out of things, though Shasta sometimes nearly thought he was. People who know a lot of the same things can hardly help talking about them, and if you are there, you can hardly help feeling that you're out of it. Hwin the mare was rather shy before a great warhorse like Bree, and said very little. And Aravis never spoke to Shasta at all if she could help it. Soon, however, they had more important things to think of. They were getting near Tashbaan. There were more and larger villages and more people on the roads. They now did nearly all their traveling by night and hid as best they could during the day. And at every halt, they argued and argued about what they were to do when they reached Tashbaan. Everyone had been putting off this difficulty, but now it could be put off no longer. During these discussions, Aravis became very little, less unfriendly to Shasta. One usually gets on better with people when one is making plans than when one is talking about nothing in particular. Bree said that the first thing now to do was to fix a place where they would all promise to meet on the far side of Tashbaan, even if, by any ill luck, they got separated in passing the city. He said the best place would be the tombs of the ancient kings on the very edge of the desert. Things like great stone beehives, he said. You can't possibly miss them. And the best of it is that none of the Calermeans will go near them because they think the place is haunted by ghouls and are afraid of it. Aravis asked if it wasn't really haunted by ghouls, but Bree said he was a free Narnian horse and he didn't believe in those Calermean tales. And then Shasta said he wasn't a Calermean either, and he didn't care a straw about those old stories of ghouls. This wasn't quite true, but it rather impressed Aravis, though at the moment it annoyed her too. And of course, she said she didn't mind any number of ghouls either, so it was settled that the tomb should be their assembly place on the other side of Tashbaan, and everyone felt they were getting on very well until Hwin humbly pointed out the real problem was not where they should go when they had gotten through Tashbaan, but how they were going to get through it. "We'll settle that tomorrow, ma'am," said Bree. "Time for a little sleep now." But it wasn't easy to settle. Aravis's first suggestion was they should swim across the river below the city during the night and not go into Tashbaan at all. But Bree had 2 reasons against this. One was the river mouth was very wide, and it would be far too long a swim for Hwin to do, especially with a rider on her back. He thought it would be too long for himself too, but he said less about that. The other was that it would be full of shipping, and of course anyone on the deck of a ship who saw two horses swimming past would be almost certain to be inquisitive. Shasta thought they should go up the river above Tashbaan and cross it where it was narrower. But Bree explained there were gardens and pleasure houses on both banks of the river for miles, and there would be Tarkans and Tarkinas living in them and riding about the roads and having water parties on the river. In fact, it would be the most likely place in the world for meeting someone who would recognize Aravis or even himself. "We'll have to have a disguise," said Shasta. Hwin said it looked to her as if the safest thing was to go right through the city itself from gate to gate, because one was less likely to be noticed in the crowd. But she approved of the idea of a disguise as well. She said, "Both the humans will have to dress in rags and look like peasants or slaves. And all of Aravis's armor and our saddles and things must be made into bundles and put on our backs. And the children must pretend to drive us, and the people will think we're only pack horses." "My dear Hwin," said Aravis rather scornfully, "as if anyone could mistake Bree for anything but a war horse, however you disguised him." "I should think not, indeed," said Bree, snorting and letting his ears go ever so back. "I know it's not a very good plan," said Hwin, "but I think it's our only chance. And we haven't been groomed for ages, and we're not looking quite ourselves at least I'm sure I'm not. I do think if we get well plastered with mud and go along with our heads down as if we're tired and lazy and don't lift our hooves hardly at all, we might not get noticed. And our tails ought to be cut shorter, not neatly, all ragged." "My dear madam," said Bree, "have you pictured to yourself how very disagreeable it would be to arrive in Narnia in that condition?" "Well," said Hwin humbly, for she was a very sensible mare, "the main thing is to get there." Though nobody much liked it, it was Hwin's plan which had to be adopted in the end. It was a troublesome one, and involved a certain amount of what Shasta called stealing and Bree called raiding. One farm lost a few sacks that evening, and another lost a coil of rope, and the next had some tattered old boys' clothes for Aravis to wear. Those had to be fairly bought and paid for in a village. Shasta returned with them in triumph just as evening was closing in. The others were waiting for him among the trees at the foot of a low range in the wooded hills, which lay right across their path. Everyone was feeling excited because this was the last hill. When they reached the ridge at the top, they would be looking down at Tashbaan. "I do wish we were safely past it," muttered Shasta to Hwin. "Oh, I do," said Hwin fervently. That night, they wound their way through the woods up to the ridge by a woodcutter's track. And when they came out of the woods at the top, they could see thousands of lights in the valley down below them. Shasta had no notion of what a great city would look like. It frightened him. They had their supper, and the children got some sleep, but the horses woke them early in the morning. The stars were still out, and the grass was terribly cold and wet, but daybreak was just beginning far to their right across the sea. Aravis went a few steps away into the wood, and came back looking odd in her new ragged clothes and carrying her real ones in a bundle. These and her armor and shield and scimitar and the two saddles and the rest of the horse's fine furnishings were put in the sacks. Bree and Hwin had already gotten themselves as dirty and bedraggled as they could, and remained to shorten their tails. The only tool for doing this was Aravis's scimitar. One of the packs had to be undone again in order to get it out. It was the longest job, and it rather hurt the horses. "My word," said Bree. "If I wasn't a talking horse, what a lovely kick in the face I could give you. I thought you were going to cut it, not pull it out. That's what it feels like." But in spite of the semi-darkness and cold fingers, all was done in the end, and the big packs bound on their horses, and the rope halters, which they were now wearing instead of bridles and reins, and the children's hands, and the journey began. "Remember," said Bree, "keep together if we possibly can. If not, meet at the tomb of the ancient kings, and whoever gets there first must wait for the others." "And remember," said Shasta, "don't you two horses forget yourself and start talking, whatever happens." And that's the end of chapter 3. So in chapter 3, we get to learn more the story of Aravis and Hwin. We get to learn even a little bit about the culture of this new foreign land that this story is set in. The story happening within the land of Kalermen, and especially with the way that Aravis speaks her story with such great formality. It reminds me a lot of the Arabian Nights. I think that was the feel that C.S. Lewis was looking for in his land of Kalermen. A sort of a ancient, mythic, Middle Eastern country with the deserts and the sea and its sultans and grand viziers, and we're starting to see how this very different culture has operated with its very different rules. And in the story of Aravis, though it sounds, well, almost a little pompous and arrogant at times, I think we still hear in the heart of it a young girl who's worried and who's scared and who doesn't want her life taken away from her, or an imposed slavery of an imposed marriage, and really just hopes to be free. And so here they are, the four of them, all very different. Strangely enough, it's Bree and Aravis who seem to get along best together. But now with the four of them needing to be a team, needing to be partners, stand on the doorstep of this great and imposing city with only hopes they will know how to make it through without being caught.